Applause was the only currency my parents ever truly valued. For them, it was more precious than the dollar, more potent than love, and certainly more important than me. I learned this early, standing in the wings of auditoriums, the fabric of whatever frilly dress my mother had chosen for me scratching at my skin. I'd watch them on stage, bathed in the warm, forgiving glow of spotlights, and they would transform. At home, they were Robert and Elaine Carter, brittle, critical, and perpetually disappointed. But on stage, they became something else entirely. They were hope. Capital H. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own home, if you've ever been told your truth doesn't matter, then you know what it feels like to be invisible. This is the story of how I learned to stop being invisible, and how I took back the light that my family had spent a lifetime trying to extinguish. Stick around, because the silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. And if you believe in the power of truth, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be heard. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. My childhood home wasn't a place of warmth, it was a museum. Every piece of furniture was a carefully curated artifact, every photograph on the wall a testament to the grand performance of our lives. The largest photo, the one hanging over the marble fireplace, was of my parents shaking hands with the governor, a massive novelty check for the Carter Hope Foundation held between them. They were smiling, their teeth impossibly white, their eyes crinkling with a practiced sincerity that never quite reached me when the cameras were off. The Carter Hope Foundation was their masterpiece, their magnum opus. To the city of Northwood, Ohio, it was a beacon. It funded after-school programs, sponsored soup kitchens, and promised to build a new pediatric wing for the local hospital. My parents were saints, philanthropists, pillars of the community. Their names were whispered with a reverence usually reserved for clergy. Behind closed doors, the sainthood evaporated. The air in our house was thin, sterile, and always carried the faint scent of my mother's expensive, cloying perfume. Dinner conversations were not about my day at school, they were postmortems of their public appearances. Did you hear the applause after my anecdote about old Mr. Henderson, Robert? They were eating out of the palm of my hand, my mother Elaine would say, daintily dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. It was strong, darling, my father would reply, his voice losing its booming, charitable warmth and becoming clipped, analytical. But you paused a half-second too long before the punchline. It signals hesitation. We need to project unwavering confidence. I'd sit there, a silent spectator at their table, pushing broccoli around my plate. If I dared to interject, to speak of a failed math test or a friendship squabble, my mother's gaze would sharpen. Bella, please. We're discussing important matters. Your little dramas can wait. My imperfections were a constant source of irritation for them. A C+ on a report card was a personal insult to their legacy. My shyness at their fundraisers was a willful refusal to support the family. The worst was my questioning nature. I noticed things. I saw the discrepancies between the heartfelt speeches about sacrifice and the constant stream of packages from Neiman Marcus and Saks. I saw the way my father's face would tighten with fury when a donation check was smaller than he'd anticipated. The weight of their hypocrisy was a physical presence in the house, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I learned to survive by becoming small, quiet, and unnoticeable. I became an expert at fading into the wallpaper, my silence a shield against their criticism. The moment the truth began to crystallize from a vague unease into a cold, hard certainty came when I was 16. I was looking for a stamp in my father's mahogany desk to mail a college application. His study was his sanctuary, a room of dark wood, leather-bound books he never read, and the faint smell of cigar smoke and self-satisfaction. The drawers were usually locked, but this time, the top right one was slightly ajar. Curiosity, a dangerous and long-suppressed instinct, got the better of me. I pulled it open. It wasn't filled with stamps or stationery. It was stuffed, chaotically, with receipts. Not for office supplies. One was from a jeweler in the Cayman Islands for a diamond tennis bracelet that cost more than my first car would. The memo line simply read, "Donor gift." I knew for a fact that the donor in question, a sweet elderly widow, had received a fruit basket. I dug deeper, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were invoices from a catering company for the annual Hope Gala. I'd been to the gala. I knew the food. But the numbers on the invoice were astronomical, inflated by at least double. At the bottom, a handwritten note, per Robert's instructions, 50% kickback. There were more. Receipts for first-class flights and five-star hotels categorized under site visits to impoverished regions. An architectural plan, not for a pediatric wing, but for a sprawling beach house in the Bahamas, with funds traced back to a special projects account meant for disaster relief. The air left my lungs. It was a cold, sickening rush. This wasn't just hypocrisy. This was a sophisticated, breathtakingly arrogant fraud. They weren't just neglecting me, they were stealing from the very people they claimed to champion. The poor, the sick, the hopeful, they were all just marks in my parents' long con. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to scream, to run into the living room and throw the receipts in their faces. But the 16 years of conditioning held me fast. Who would believe me? I was Bella Carter, their awkward, moody daughter. They were Robert and Elaine Carter, the saviors of the city. My word against theirs was a whisper against a hurricane. My throat closed up, and the familiar feeling of powerlessness washed over me. I quietly closed the drawer, the click of the wood sounding like a cell door locking shut. But this time, something inside me had changed. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a tiny hard ember of rage began to glow. I tried to speak up once. Just once. A few weeks later, at another one of our silent performative dinners, my father was boasting about a new fundraising drive for a homeless shelter. "We're going to ensure no one in this city has to sleep in the cold this winter," he declared, slicing into a thick, rare steak. My voice was a reedy tremor when I spoke. "The shelter on Elm Street has had a leak in its roof for 6 months. They said they've filed 3 grant requests with the foundation and haven't heard back." The silence that followed was heavy and cold. My father put down his knife and fork, the silver clinking loudly against the china. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all evening. There was no kindness in his eyes. Only irritation. "And how would you know about that, Bella?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. I volunteer there sometimes. After school." My mother sighed, a sound of pure theatrical exasperation. "For heaven's sake, Bella. You're fraternizing with the beneficiaries. It's unseemly. And you certainly have no place questioning the foundation's processes. We have a system. A very effective system."
"But their roof is leaking now," I insisted, my voice gaining a desperate edge. "The money from the Bahamas house could fix that roof 100 times over." The words hung in the air, electric and fatal. My father's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. My mother's perfectly painted lips thinned into a razor-sharp line. "What did you say?" My father ground out, each word a block of ice. I saw the look on his face, and the last of my courage shriveled. I had seen him angry, but this was different. This was the fury of a king whose authority had been questioned by a court jester. I'm sorry," I stammered, my eyes dropping to my plate. "I didn't mean anything. I was just—" "You were being foolish," my mother cut in, her voice like chipping ice. "You have a wild, ungrateful imagination, Bella. You are raised in comfort, given every opportunity, and this is how you repay us? By fabricating lurid, disgusting fantasies? You should be grateful. You should be on your knees thanking God you were born to people like us, pillars of this community, instead of ending up like one of the wretches you seem so fond of." I didn't say another word. I excused myself from the table, my half-eaten steak growing cold. I went to my room and locked the door, the hot shame and fury burning behind my eyes. I didn't cry. Crying felt like a waste of energy. Instead, I sat at my desk and pulled out the college acceptance letter I'd been meaning to mail. It was for a university 1,000 miles away. As I sealed the envelope, the ember of rage inside me finally caught fire. They thought I was foolish. They thought I was ungrateful. They thought I was weak. They were right about one thing. I should be grateful. Grateful that they had shown me exactly who they were. Grateful that they had given me a purpose. I wasn't just leaving home to escape them. I was leaving to learn. I would study their world, the world of nonprofits and fundraising and public relations. I would learn its language, its systems, its weaknesses. I would make myself an expert. I wouldn't be their shy, quiet daughter forever. One day, I would come back. And when I did, I would be the hurricane. I wasn't just going to college. I was going to war. And my first assignment was to learn how to build an empire out of the one thing they never understood: the truth. Part 2. Forging a weapon. The 1,000 miles between Northwood and my university campus felt like a journey to a different planet. The air was cleaner, the pressure in my chest eased, and for the first time, my name was just Bella. Not Bella Carter, daughter of the philanthropists. Just Bella. The anonymity was a bomb. It was freedom. But I wasn't there for freedom. I was there to forge a weapon. I declared my major in non-profit management with a minor in accounting. My parents, on our stilted weekly phone calls, found it quaint. "Oh, how lovely, darling," my mother said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Trying to follow in our footsteps. Just remember, the real work isn't in the textbooks. It's about charisma. It's about vision." I let her believe it. Let them think I was their harmless, hero-worshipping daughter. Meanwhile, I was devouring those textbooks. I spent my nights in the library, not at parties. I learned about grant writing, forensic accounting, and donor-advised funds. I learned the legal definitions of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Every page was a revelation, showing me not just the mechanics of charity, but the precise anatomy of my parents' crimes. They had built their kingdom on a foundation of loopholes and lies, and I was meticulously drawing the map to its every weakness. While my classmates were stressing about exams, I was conducting my own private investigation from my dorm room. I used the university's database to pull the Carter Hope Foundation's publicly available 990 tax forms. To the untrained eye, they were pristine. But with my newfound knowledge, I could see the rot beneath the surface. Administrative costs that were an absurdly high percentage of their total budget. Vague multi-million-dollar line items for programmatic consulting paid out to a shell corporation I eventually traced to an address in the Cayman Islands, the same place my mother's donor gift bracelet came from. The work was grueling and lonely. There were nights I'd be staring at spreadsheets until my vision blurred, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. Doubt would creep in, a cold, familiar whisper. "What are you doing? They're too big, too powerful. You're just one person." On those nights, I would pull up the Carter Hope Foundation's social media page. There they'd be, smiling on a yacht during a charity regatta, or cutting a ribbon at a new building, their faces glowing with self-congratulation. The sight of their smug, benevolent masks would instantly reignite the cold fire in my gut. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice for every person who had ever dropped $1 into their donation buckets, believing they were helping someone. After graduation, I didn't go home. I took a low-paying job at a small, scrappy grassroots organization in Philadelphia that ran a food bank out of a church basement. The work was backbreaking. I unloaded trucks, stocked shelves, and handed out bags of groceries to people whose eyes held a weariness I recognized. There were no galas, no spotlights, no applause. Our founder, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Maria, drove a 10-year-old Honda and packed her own lunch. Our administrative budget was whatever was left after we bought the food, and it was never much. But every single night, when we locked the doors, we knew exactly how many families we had fed. We could count the impact in metrics that mattered: full stomachs, relieved sighs, a child getting a carton of milk. It was real. And it was the polar opposite of the Carter Hope Foundation. It became my model. For 5 years, I worked my way up. From the food bank to a housing rights group, then to a literacy program. I learned how to stretch $1 until it screamed. I learned how to mobilize volunteers with nothing but a compelling story and a pot of coffee. I learned how to build a community based on trust, not on a brand. I was living a life so far removed from my parents' world that they barely registered my existence, aside from sending a sterile, professionally printed Christmas card once a year. They thought I was drifting, a lost little girl playing at charity. They had no idea I was in a crucible, hardening myself, sharpening my skills. Then, when I was 27, I knew it was time. I had the experience, the knowledge, and a small amount of savings I had guarded fiercely. I quit my job, packed my few belongings into my car, and drove back to Northwood. Driving back into the city limits felt like entering enemy territory. Their name was everywhere. The Carter Hope Pavilion at the park, the Carter Wing at the museum. Their faces smiled down from billboards, their legacy woven into the very fabric of the city. I felt the old weight settle on my shoulders, the instinct to become small and invisible. I had to physically grip the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and force it away. I was not that girl anymore. I rented a tiny, forgotten storefront on the industrial side of town, a place with peeling paint and a faint smell of mildew. The rent was cheap for a reason. This was the birthplace of the True Light Network. My mission was simple, radical, and a direct assault on my parents' entire philosophy: 100% transparency. The first few months were brutal. I was the founder, the janitor, the grant writer, and the sole volunteer. I built a simple, clean website myself. On the homepage, in bold letters, it said, "See where every dollar goes." Every single one. I created a section called The Books and uploaded a live, constantly updated budget spreadsheet. Anyone at any time could see our income, our expenses, down to the penny. They could see I paid myself a tiny, barely livable salary. They could see that we spent $42.50 on office supplies and $3,000 on groceries for the mobile food pantry I had started. At first, the city was indifferent. Who was True Light Network? It was nothing. A blip. The Carter Hope Foundation was the sun in our local philanthropic solar system. I was a speck of dust. I'd go to community meetings and introduce myself, and the moment I said my last name, I'd see the flicker of confusion, then pity. "Oh, you're Robert and Elaine's girl. How nice." They saw me as a hobbyist, a dilettante playing in her parents' sandbox. My parents heard about it, of course. My mother called me, her voice a cocktail of amusement and concern. "Bella, darling, what is this little project of yours? I saw your website. It's all a bit amateur, isn't it? Laying out the finances like that? It's rather tacky. People want to be inspired, not look at a ledger." "I think people want to know their money is helping," I said, my voice even. She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, sweetie, you have so much to learn. Leave the real work to us. Why don't you come volunteer for the gala committee? You could be in charge of floral arrangements." I politely declined. That phone call was a gift. It proved they didn't see me as a threat. They saw me as a joke. And that was the best camouflage I could have asked for.
Slowly, painfully slowly, something began to shift. I wasn't trying to win over the big corporate donors or the city's old money. I was targeting a different group, the small dollar donors, the people who put $20 in a collection plate, the teachers and firefighters and nurses who wanted to help but were cynical about where their money went. I didn't just show them the budget, I showed them the work. I started a blog with testimonials from the people we helped, always with their permission. I posted photos not of galas, but of volunteers handing a warm blanket to a man sleeping on a park bench. I convinced a young film student to volunteer, and he began making short, raw videos of our work, packing lunches for kids, delivering groceries to elderly shut-ins. No dramatic music, no soaring rhetoric. Just the quiet, dignified work of helping. The first real seed of doubt was planted by a local baker. He had donated $10,000 to the Carter Hope Foundation's annual food drive and had received a form letter and a tax receipt. Out of curiosity, he gave $100 to True Light. The next day, I emailed him a link to our budget, where his $100 was logged, and a photo of the bread, milk, and canned goods it had purchased, along with a handwritten thank you note. A week later, he called me. "I don't get it," he said, his voice genuinely perplexed. "My 10 grand to your parents' foundation got me a letter. Your $100 got me proof. What's going on here? He started talking. He told other small business owners. The whispers began. In coffee shops, in community forums online, on neighborhood Facebook groups. Why does the Carter Hope Foundation's annual report look like a glossy fashion magazine, while this little Truelight group shows you the receipt for every bag of rice? I saw Truelight volunteers actually out there, in the rain, handing out coats. When was the last time you saw a Carter Hope executive do anything but pose for a picture? The whispers were getting louder. They were becoming a hum. It was the sound of a narrative beginning to fray at the edges. One evening, as I was locking up my dingy little office, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Is this Bella Carter?" a woman's voice asked. It was professional, crisp. "It is. Who's calling?" "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a reporter with the Northwood Chronicle. I've been hearing some interesting things about your organization and its unique approach to financial transparency. I'm working on a piece about the changing face of charity in our city. I was hoping you might have some time to talk." I leaned against the cold glass of my storefront window, looking out at the darkening street. The hum had just become a signal. A signal that could be amplified, broadcast, and aimed directly at the heart of an empire built on lies. The weapon was forged. The time for quiet preparation was over. "I'd be happy to talk, Ms. Jenkins," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "I have a lot to say." Part 3, Sharpening the Blade. The meeting with Sarah Jenkins was not an interview, it was the careful placement of the first domino. I chose the location deliberately, a small, no-frills diner, the kind of place my mother wouldn't be caught dead in. I wanted Sarah to see my world, a world without pretense. I arrived early, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. My heart was a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was it. The culmination of years of silent, painstaking work. When Sarah arrived, she was exactly as her voice had suggested, sharp, intelligent, with a gaze that missed nothing. She had a notepad and a digital recorder, but she didn't activate them right away. She just wanted to talk. So she began, taking a sip of her own coffee. "Your model is aggressive. Publicly posting every single expense? That's not transparency, that's radical transparency. It makes the big players look, frankly, secretive." I gave a small, practiced shrug. "It's not meant to be aggressive. It's just logical. If you give someone your money to do a job, you have a right to see how they're spending it. Whether you're investing in a company or donating to a cause, the principle is the same. Our donors are our investors. We owe them the truth." I never once mentioned my parents or the Carter Hope Foundation. I didn't have to. They were the unspoken context for our entire conversation. I had spent years rehearsing for this moment, and I knew my role perfectly. I was the earnest, passionate idealist. I spoke about efficiency, direct impact, and leveraging community trust. I laid out the numbers, comparing the cost per meal served of a small volunteer-driven operation versus a large-scale traditional charity with massive overhead. "For instance," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket, "we recently ran a winter coat drive. We raised $7,000. That money bought 350 brand-new, high-quality winter coats, which we distributed directly to people at the downtown shelter. Our administrative cost for the entire drive was $28 for the gas to pick up and drop off the coats. That's an overhead of 0.4%. I let her absorb that. I didn't mention that the Carter Hope Foundation's annual coat drive involved a black tie kickoff event that cost, by my estimate from their own tax filings, upwards of $60,000 before a single coat was ever purchased. I didn't need to draw the comparison. Sarah Jenkins was smart enough to do the math herself. She finally turned on her recorder. For the next hour, I answered her questions with calm, factual precision. I told stories, not about myself, but about the people Truelight had helped. The single mother who could keep her heat on because we covered her utility bill. The elderly man who wept with gratitude when we delivered him a week's worth of groceries. I was giving her the human element, the emotional core that would make the financial data resonate. As we were wrapping up, she finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Your parents are Robert and Elaine Carter. You grew up in the world of big philanthropy. Did their work influence your different approach?" I paused, feigning a moment of thoughtful consideration. I learned a lot from watching them, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I learned that a good story is powerful. And I decided that the most powerful story of all is the one you can back up with verifiable facts. I want to tell a story that doesn't have any secrets. The article came out 3 days later. It was a masterpiece of implication. The headline was "The New Face of Charity? How One Small Nonprofit is Forcing a Big Conversation." The piece was a glowing profile of TrueLight Network, praising our efficiency and our radical transparency. It never explicitly criticized the Carter Hope Foundation, but it held us up as such a starkly different model that the criticism was unavoidable. Sarah quoted my line about the 0.4% overhead on the coat drive. And then, in the very next paragraph, she stated for context that the nationally accepted average for nonprofit overhead was between 20 and 35%. The city of Northwood read the article over their morning coffee, and the hum of whispers I had been cultivating for months exploded into a full-throated conversation. The comments section on the newspaper's website was a war zone. Finally, someone is saying it. I'm so tired of getting endless glossy mailers from Carter Hope asking for money. Wait, 0.4% overhead? That's insane. Where is all the money going at the other foundations? I'm switching my monthly donation to TrueLight today. I want my money to buy coats, not canapés. The domino had fallen, and it was starting a chain reaction. My phone began to ring non-stop. Donations, big and small, flooded our website. Local businesses offered to partner with us. The film student who made our videos was now leading a team of volunteer creatives. My dingy little office was suddenly a bustling hive of activity. But the most significant calls came from sources I never could have anticipated. An anonymous email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "I used to work for them." Inside was a short cryptic message, "Check the invoices from Global Visions Creative. It's a shell company for their personal travel. The evidence is in the server archives." Another came from a man who owned a local printing company. He called me, his voice low and nervous. "Ms. Carter, I did the printing for your parents' gala programs for years. Every year, they'd ask me for 2 sets of invoices. One with the real discounted price that they paid me, and another, inflated one for their books. I always felt dirty about it. If you ever need someone to testify to that, I will." I felt a cold, thrilling certainty wash over me. My army was gathering. I wasn't alone anymore. The truth had a gravity all its own, and it was pulling people out of the woodwork, people who had been silenced or complicit for years and now saw a chance for absolution. I spent my days running TrueLight, managing the sudden, explosive growth. The work was exhausting and exhilarating. We were helping more people than I had ever dreamed possible. But my nights were for the war. I would sit at my small kitchen table, a single lamp cutting through the darkness, and I would collate the information. I cross-referenced the anonymous tip about the shell company with the 990s I had downloaded in college. It was a perfect match. I documented the printer's story, taking careful, detailed notes. I was building a case, brick by brick, a fortress of facts that would be impenetrable. Sleep became a luxury. I was fueled by caffeine and a righteous glacial fury that had been building for over a decade. I would think back to that 16-year-old girl in her father's study, feeling so small and powerless. I would think of my mother's dismissive laugh on the phone. They had never seen me. They had only ever seen a disappointing reflection of themselves. Now they were about to see me for who I truly was. The Carter Hope Foundation's annual gala was their crown jewel, the biggest society event of the year. This year, it was scheduled for a month after Sarah Jenkins' article was published. I knew they would try to use the event as a show of force, a way to silence the growing rumors and reassert their dominance. They would make it bigger, more lavish, more self-congratulatory than ever before. And that's where I would spring the trap. I didn't need to be there. In fact, my absence was key. I started a quiet, targeted outreach to a select group of journalists, including Sarah. I didn't give them my entire dossier of evidence. That would come later. Instead, I gave them something much more potent: questions. To Sarah, I sent a simple anonymous email. "You might want to ask Mr. Carter how the Foundation's stated mission of local hope for local people aligns with the purchase of a beachfront property in the Bahamas through the Special Projects account." To a TV investigative reporter known for his pitbull tenacity, I sent another tip: ask Elaine Carter to comment on the foundation's relationship with the catering vendor Elite Events. Specifically, why their invoices are consistently 75% higher than any other vendor in the state, and what her personal relationship is with the owner. I was seeding the ground, arming them not with accusations, but with incurable curiosity. I knew the reporters would do their own digging. I was simply pointing them toward the bodies I had already buried. The night of the gala arrived. It was a cold, clear November evening. The local news channels were running live coverage from the red carpet outside the city's grandest hotel. I watched on a small, flickering television in my office. I saw my father, resplendent in a tuxedo, laughing his big, booming laugh for the cameras. I saw my mother, draped in diamonds and silk, looking like a queen, telling a reporter that this would be their biggest year of giving yet. They looked untouchable, invincible. But I could see the cracks. My father's laugh didn't quite reach his eyes. My mother's smile was just a little too tight. The article had rattled them, and now they were overcompensating. I wasn't watching the gala. I was watching the watchers. I had my laptop open, monitoring social media, waiting. Sarah Jenkins was live tweeting from inside the ballroom, describing the ostentatious ice sculptures and the river of champagne. Then, her tweets stopped. 10 minutes went by. 15. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The anticipation was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest, a thrumming under my skin. This was the moment. The culmination of a decade of planning. All the lonely nights, all the insults, all the quiet, painstaking work, it all came down to this. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. A single sentence. The speech is starting. We're ready. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my humble office. I thought I would feel nervous, or even hateful. Instead, I felt a profound and unsettling calm. The calm of a general on a hilltop, watching their perfectly planned artillery strike begin its silent, inevitable descent. The show was about to begin. And the applause, for the first time, would be for the truth. Part 4, The Reckoning. The world didn't learn about the downfall of the Carter Hope Foundation from me. It learned about it from a shaky cell phone video, broadcast live on the internet from the back of a gilded ballroom. I watched it all unfold on my laptop screen, the audio tinny and distorted, the image pixelated. But the raw, unfiltered reality of it was more compelling than any high-definition broadcast could ever be. On the screen, my father stood at a podium adorned with the Carter Hope logo. He was in the middle of his keynote address, his voice resonating with that familiar, practiced sincerity. He was talking about a recent heavily publicized donation they had made to the Children's Hospital, a project they had finally been forced to fast-track due to the public pressure I had indirectly created. And when I see the faces of those children, he boomed, his arms spread wide, I know that every dollar, every moment of hard work is worth it. We are not just a foundation. We are a family. We are hope. The crowd of Northwood's elite, decked out in their jewels and tuxedos, began to applaud. But before the sound could build to its usual crescendo, a figure stood up. It was Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't shouting. Her voice, amplified by the microphone she held, was calm, clear, and cut through the room like a shard of glass. Mr. Carter. The applause faltered, dying out into a confused murmur. My father blinked, thrown off script. His smile flickered. Yes? I believe we're holding questions until after the speech. This can't wait, sir, Sarah said, her voice unwavering. She took a step into the aisle, and a camera light from her crew suddenly illuminated her, turning the spectacle into a press conference. You just mentioned every dollar being worth it. I have a question about a specific set of dollars. Can you explain to the donors in this room why the Carter Hope Foundation's Special Projects account, funded by public donations for disaster relief, was used to purchase a $3.5 million beachfront property in the Bahamas? A collective gasp went through the room. It was audible even on the low-quality stream. The camera zoomed in on my father's face. For one long, agonizing moment, he was speechless. The mask of the benevolent philanthropist dissolved, revealing the flustered, cornered man underneath. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. That is a gross mischaracterization, he finally stammered. That property is an asset, an investment for the foundation's future. Before he could regain his footing, another reporter, the pit bull from the TV station, stood up on the other side of the room. "Mr. Carter, a follow-up, if I may. Can you also comment on why your foundation exclusively uses an event vendor, Elite Events, that is owned by a holding company registered to your wife's brother? And why that vendor's invoices are, on average, double the market rate?" Now the murmurs in the room turned into loud, shocked whispers. People were turning to look at my mother, who was seated at the head table. Her face was a frozen, horrified mask, her perfect posture suddenly rigid. The camera panned to her, and for a second, I saw past the diamonds and the designer gown to the raw panic in her eyes. They were trapped. The gilded cage they had built for themselves had suddenly become a public pillory. My father banged his fist on the podium, a desperate, clumsy attempt to regain control. "This is an outrage. This is a private event, not a witch hunt. Security." But it was too late. The dam had broken. The questions were flying from all corners now, a cacophony of accusations about the shell companies, the inflated salaries, the kickbacks. The live stream I was watching shook violently as people began to stand, to move, to shout. The whole opulent affair was devolving into chaos. My father, the great orator, stood there, utterly defeated, his face ashen under the hot lights. The last thing I saw before the feed cut out was my mother, Elaine, grabbing his arm and pulling him off the stage, not with grace, but with a desperate, panicked yank. The kings had been dethroned. I closed my laptop. The silence of my small office was profound. I didn't cheer. I didn't pump my fist in the air. I simply sat there, breathing in the quiet. I felt a slow, deep, seismic release of a tension I had been carrying since I was a child. The weight on my chest, the pressure that had made it hard to breathe in my own home, was finally blessedly gone. It wasn't the giddy thrill of victory. It was the quiet, solid, grounding feeling of justice. The next morning, the city was on fire. Every local news station led with the story. The Northwood Chronicle's front page was a single devastating photo of my father's stunned face at the podium, under the headline, "The Hopeless Foundation." Sarah's article was a meticulously researched masterpiece, laying out every piece of evidence I had helped her uncover. The story was picked up by national news outlets. The Carter Hope Foundation wasn't just a local scandal anymore, it was a national symbol of philanthropic fraud. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Attorney General announced a formal investigation within 48 hours. The foundation's board of directors resigned en masse. Donors, from the city's largest corporations to the little old ladies who sent in $20 checks, began demanding their money back and publicly denouncing my parents. The Carter name, once a symbol of civic pride, was now synonymous with disgrace. Through it all, I remained silent. My name was mentioned in some articles as the founder of the hyper-transparent TrueLight network, the stark contrast that had started the whole conversation. The press camped outside my office, begging for a comment. I instructed my volunteers to simply say, "We're too busy with our work to comment on other organizations." And we were busy. The implosion of the Carter Hope Foundation created a vacuum, and a flood of disillusioned donors came rushing to us. Our online donation portal crashed twice from the sheer volume of traffic. We went from a shoestring operation to one of the best-funded charities in the city overnight. I had to hire a small staff, find a bigger office, and scale up our operations at a dizzying speed. Every headline that detailed another of my parents' sickening extravagances, a new sports car listed as a transport vehicle, a spa trip as a wellness retreat, was followed by a fresh wave of donations to TrueLight. They didn't want their money to buy champagne, they wanted it to buy groceries. I was giving them that chance. I never gloated. I didn't need to. My success was my statement. The quiet, relentless hum of our work was the only response required. About a month after the gala, on a cold, rainy evening, I was working late in our new, much larger office. We were planning a free community health fair, a project that would have been an impossible dream just a few months prior. The front door opened, and a woman stepped in, shaking the rain from her coat. It was my mother. I hadn't seen her since the gala. Gone were the pearls, the perfectly coiffed hair, the designer suit. She wore a simple raincoat and no makeup. She looked smaller, diminished, as if the shame had physically compressed her. Her eyes, which were once always sharp and critical, were now cloudy and lost. The few volunteers still in the office fell silent, sensing the tension. I stood up from my desk. "Bella," she whispered, her voice raspy. She looked around the bustling office, at the whiteboards covered in plans, at the stacks of supplies, at the earnest young people working the phones. She looked at me, her daughter, the one she had dismissed and belittled, now the architect of this thriving enterprise. The foundation is over, she said, stating the obvious. Everything, it's all gone. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Her eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. But the Carter name still means something. We did good work, in the beginning. We can again. We could join forces. You and us. We could rebuild it all together. Properly this time. I looked at her for a long, silent moment. I searched my heart for any lingering flicker of pity, of love, of the old childhood yearning for her approval. I found nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The woman who had raised me, the one whose applause I had once craved, was gone. Or perhaps she had never been there at all. I smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, or a triumphant one. It was a smile of quiet, final, unshakable certainty. The smile of someone who was truly, finally free. We already rebuilt, I said, my voice soft but clear. Without you. The words hit her harder than any public accusation ever could have. It was a complete and total erasure of her relevance, her power, her entire identity. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed facade finally shattering into a million pieces. She looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization that she had not only lost her empire, but she had lost her daughter so completely that I no longer even registered her as a part of my world. She turned and left without another word, disappearing into the cold, rainy night. I watched her go, then turned back to my team, who were looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. I clapped my hands together, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. All right, everyone, I said, my voice bright and full of purpose. Let's get back to it. These health screenings aren't going to organize themselves. A murmur of agreement went through the room, and the hum of work resumed. I walked over to the large window overlooking the city. The rain was washing the streets clean. Out there, in the homes and shelters we supported, people were warmer, safer, and better fed because of the work we were doing in this room. There were no spotlights. No galas. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of real help, of real hope. And for the first time in my entire life, I knew what it felt like to hear applause that truly mattered. It wasn't the roar of a crowd. It was the sound of a community healing. And it was all the validation I would ever need. The greatest revenge isn't about destruction. It's about building something better in the place of what was broken. It's about proving that integrity is more powerful than influence, and truth is more valuable than applause. They tried to make me invisible, but in the end, they were the ones who vanished. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you believe that good work and true intentions will always win in the end, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments below, what does true justice look like to you? Until next time, remember to be the light.